Welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy podcast. Each week, we expose the faulty foundational mindsets of the past and rebuild a newer, stronger foundation essential in creating your meaningful legacy. We've got a lot of work to do, so let's get started. As much as you like this podcast, I'm certain that you're going to love the book that I just released on Amazon, Fuel Your Legacy, The 9 Pillars to Build a Meaningful Legacy. I wrote this to share with you the experiences that I had while I was identifying my identity, how I began to create my meaningful legacy, and how you can create yours. You're going to find this book on Kindle, Amazon, and as always on my website, samknickerbocker.com. Okay, welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy show. And today we have another guest. Super excited for this. Kathryn, I'm going to try this, my Spanish. Albarado is fine. I'm
Albarado,
English. Okay, good. Well, I'm trying to Spanish thing. So anyways, I actually met her, I think on Facebook. I'm not sure exactly how, but man, I'm so grateful I did meet her and got to have a conversation with her. She aligns, I think we actually connected on Instagram. You reached out or something. She aligns so much with what this podcast is about and why I do the podcast. But also brings a super unique perspective. I haven't really had anybody else come in with her experience and kind of living the life that has lived and is now living. So those are two factors there that I'm super excited about. But Kathryn is from Texas. She had a family business, helped her family. Well, her family had a family business. She inherited this family business, helped grow it, and then sold it, and now is helping other people. But what's unique about this is she's not just helping people, but specifically helping people deal with the interpersonal communication things inside of these generational businesses, helping people be successful, clearly define roles, outcomes, and what is the pathway forward. So I'm super excited. I think that this conversation is applicable not just for business owners, but for anybody who's in a family, which is probably everybody, and is wondering, how do I communicate my needs, my wants, my desires, while still being respectful and having a relationship with the people? And don't just bank on the fact, well, they're family, so they have to love me. No, that doesn't mean that's true. And in a lot of cases, it's actually not true that they don't have to love you and they will abandon you. So how do you maintain and keep those relationships even through really tough conversations? And what does compromise look like? So I'm super pumped about all of this. But Kathryn, go ahead and start with us sharing how you grew up as a child and what was that like around the family business to where you are now, and why are you so passionate about helping people improve their interpersonal communications?
For sure. So my family owned a catering business in Austin. So my entire childhood was centered around being in the business, whether it's in the kitchen or on catering events, serving the Army Reserve, helping skirt the table at somebody's wedding. We were always with each other. Being with my family was mean working within my family. They went together, right? It isn't that difficult to try to find that commonality of being in business with each other. Like, I was going to be in the business no matter what. I didn't think there was another plan. Being in our business was catering. That's what I was going to do. Being with my dad, that's what I was going to do. I think I lost the question somewhere in there.
Oh, no. Well, just tell us about your life story. Like, because you grew up in this, but what was that like? Why are you so passionate about it and moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry. I lost my train of thought because I was so excited about it. So here's the thing. I grew up in the business. My joke used to be, I've been doing this since conception. Bless you. I've been doing this since conception. So it was working on events with my dad, helping mom in the kitchen, pulling, out on events, with my family or with my friends, going out doing whatever, and then saying, hey, you need to come and do this event. So I started off as a child working day to day in the business. I went to college. I got my degree in agricultural business. And at 22, 21, I said, hey, Dad, I'm going to come into the catering business. He's like, okay, that's fantastic. But his expectations were to have the boys in the business. And then, so my older brother would take over the business. The other two brothers would help in building the business. And then his little girl would take care of the weddings. Well, the little girl took care of everything. The boys didn't want any aspect of the business. So I spent my 20s becoming the female version of my father. In that meaning, I worked 80-hour weeks. I worked in the kitchen, in the warehouse, in the at events, in meetings, learning the business from beginning to end. I did not have a life. Thank God I got married young, because I wouldn't have probably met anybody in my 20s. My life was the business. And then at age 32, my dad passed away. So now after learning the business and being put through literally hell in my 20s, it was my responsibility to continue the legacy of the business. The challenge I had was, who was I if I wasn't Albert Dagger's daughter? And I struggled with trying to find my identity within the business, my identity beyond the business, and also what people's expectations of me were, i.e., your dad wouldn't have done it this way. You better do what your dad expects you to do. Why aren't you doing it this way? Whatever it may be. So I struggled with trying to find that balance. And in that, I became very demanding of my employees, very demanding of myself, very demanding of others around me. And then I came to a point where I'm like, I have to learn how to run this business without trying to live up to who Albert Dagger was, but who Kathryn Albarado is. And when I made that decision, the business changed, I changed. We started growing. I started delegating things out, realizing that I didn't have to hold all the hats like my dad did. That was a misconception, that you have to do every single thing to make sure that your business works. No, you need to know what's going on, but you don't need to do every single thing. So I learned how to delegate those tasks, put everything that was in my head on paper, train the individuals that needed to learn those things. And then that started working well. Then 2017, I was diagnosed with a rare muscular disorder. So that even brought it up even more, like, okay, I have to delegate this more. I had to find time to find balance in my life. It can't just be catering. It can't just be the business, because my body's not going to allow it to be that way. And at that point, I said, okay, maybe I should sell the business, because if my body can't keep up with this business, then there needs to be another option. I researched it. We never had an exit strategy. We never had anything like that in our business. So I was like, okay, I'm going to call a broker. I'm going to figure out what our business is worth. We're going to analyze the business. I get it back, and I'm like, I was shocked, because what I had, the number I had in my head was there in one respect, but what was missing was the structure that I thought I had prior that I created. And I needed to create more of a structured business in order to be a sellable business. So I spent the next 3 years creating a really structured, refined business that was a profitable business, put it on the market in 2020, January. We all know what happened in March of 2020. So I pulled it from the market, because even though we lost $1 million worth of sales in that first 2 months, I wasn't going to sell my business at a discount. I can get it back to where it was going to be, let the pandemic run its course. After about 2021, business started coming back as usual. I let it run for a full year so I could have a full cycle, and it was back to the numbers that they were in 2019. So I put the business back on the market. And when I put it on the market, I go disregard 2020, just like everybody should. And I was able to sell the business within 2 months of me putting it on the market. And then here we are today. I sold the business in September of 2022. When I sold the business, I retired for like 2 weeks. And I was like, this is boring. This is not what I meant to do. I went back to school at Texas State University and received my degree or life coaching certification from Texas State University. And I began my business. My goal now is to help small business owners, generational business owners, find that balance between being a business owner and having a life, basically, encouraging to know that you can't have it all. You just have to learn your boundaries.
Yep. Sure. So I'm so excited for this. I've got so many questions, and I'm grateful that we had a previous conversation as well, to better understand the full outline of this business. And there's so many people who are in businesses, self-employed businesses, where they think they're business owners, maybe like yourself, where, hey, you have a business that's running, it's generating income. But then if you were to actually ever try and move that business into another, like sell it, it's hard because there's no system behind it. Really quick question. When you did focus on getting a system, duplicating yourself, or moving yourself from the business, did the income revenue, like did the gross revenues of the business increase with a better system, or did they pretty much just stay the same, but you got more of your time back?
The profit margins increased. And the profit margin, not necessarily that the income we had coming in, the profit increased because I wasn't trying to be everything to everybody, and we had less mistakes.
Okay, so there was less mistakes because there was more ability to focus on every job had somebody who actually focused and didn't miss stuff. And so there was less errors. So if you're like watching football or something, or any sport, there's points where somebody actually does a good job and get a point. And then there's also just like an unforced error where you screw up and now the other person gets the ball and you're like, ah, dang, that was bad. Foul on my part, right?
Correct.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I know that in my business, I've gone up and down with different things. Sometimes the scores against me, you might call them like that, like COVID, that was just happened the way it is. But then there's also unforced errors where you can go back and learn from an unforced error and say, okay, that happened last time. How do we avoid that? And that's part of creating a system and creating documents and saying, hey, this is, people wonder why they have instruction manuals or these warning labels on little things, curling irons, hair dryers, right? The warning labels are there because somebody did something dumb, like they already did something dumb. So we're trying to avoid more dumb things. And that happens, I say dumb respectively. It doesn't have to be like an accusation, but just like, well, that didn't work.
I call it a stupid tax.
Yeah. It's just stupid tax. I like it. So let's go back to the kind of the beginning though. So you were born into this business. I want to understand when you were growing up with friends, did your business ever employ other of your friends? Did you ever say, hey, friend, I got to go to work, but do you want to come with me? And maybe we'll give you a few dollars. I don't know. Did that ever happen inside of your family business?
It did. And cousins and friends and anybody we could pull off the street to help. You did. Because that was I remember one time I was like a sophomore in high school, and the guy I was dating at the time had his driver's license. My dad goes, can he drive the truck? I'm like, why? Because we need to get something to XYZ location, and he's the only one available. I'm like, okay. So I had to, pull my boyfriend into the mix. Hey, you want to come help load up a truck so we can take it to this wedding that they're missing glassware on? Thanks. I mean, that relationship didn't last much after that.
Yeah. Well, that kind of leads into the next question though. When you mentioned that you are glad you got married young because you didn't have time to get married or date after. How did your husband, when you did meet and end up going through this, how did he respond to that excessive involvement in the business? Did he join the business? Like, what was the either unspoken or spoken negotiation as like, hey, you're marrying me, but you're not just marrying me, you're marrying my family business, which means you're marrying my family because they're all there. How did that conversation go?
He knew. I mean, from the moment he met me, he understood that family came first for me and that my business came first for me. So he knew what he was getting into before he said, I do. What's funny enough, he was going to go to law school and he got accepted to school in Florida. And we were only married 4 months at that point. And I said, you need to go. I'll stay here or I'll get a job there, whichever it is. You need to go and follow your dream. He's like, I'm not leaving you, and I can't ask you to leave your family. I just can't do that. So he didn't go to law school. And he stayed behind and he came into the family business, and he worked side by side with me for 20 years in the family business. I wouldn't be where I don't give him he doesn't get enough credit. The world doesn't give him enough credit. Without him, I wouldn't have ever done what I did with the business without his support. And he was that people go, oh, what does Frank do? What does he do in the business? He's a jack of all trades. He picks up the things that I just don't have time for, or the conversations, or heads things off at the door. So I don't have to deal with the stuff that employees' emotions or I can deal with the facts of running my business. Frank, if without Frank, I wouldn't have been able to run Daggers Catering, hands down. He does not get enough credit.
And I love that. And that's why I asked, because I don't know exactly what role, but I do know that success in business often relies on having a successful partner, and I know this sounds crazy, but there are some people who become successful in business with no partner, as far as no intimate partner or relationship, but they still have business partners, people who are their ride or dies, people who can clean up the pieces, just like you said, on the way. And I think that I want to make sure that he gets recognized for that, because it's a big thing to give up your dreams. It's a big thing to say, oh, well, I guess I'm not going to do that, because of a value system. And understanding value systems is crucial, because if value systems aren't understood and being clear before, then resentment can get brought in. And I'm not saying that there wasn't ever any of that or any arguments or anything like that, but I think that the power of having a supportive spouse and somebody who's willing to go with you is so valuable, and not enough people have that. And that's not an accusation to the spouses who are not doing that for their spouse, or, but it's just a reality. That's a major contributing factor to successful businesses that I think gets overlooked, is the support of a supportive spouse.
110%. Frank used to joke, or he still does joke. He goes, Kathryn's my boss at work and Kathryn's my boss at home. At the end of it's a joke, but it's like 2 weeks after we sold the business, he looks at me and goes, or 2 or 3 weeks, and goes, hey, I just realized you can't tell me what to do anymore. I was like, I hate to tell you this, but I'm still your wife and I can't tell you what to do. But it is about doing that. It's about somebody being able to call you out on your BS, right? When you step over line, Frank would be able to just give me a look like you went too far, or you need to do this, and just be that sounding board of letting it go. It's you need your spouse, but also when you work with your spouse and you have that supportive spouse, you need to make sure you're not putting everything on that spouse. Meaning, like, even though we work together, we took different vehicles into work. We came in at different times because we needed to talk to our friends. We needed to be apart. We need that quiet because we saw each other all the time. And you also need somebody outside that relationship who's a friend, who's a mentor, who you can gripe at and say, hey, this is what I'm going through. Because as supportive as he is, there's some days he just doesn't want to hear it anymore.
Well, and especially if you guys are both experiencing the same stress of the business, then it's actually a negative cycle to complain to each other, because you're both in it and it's hard to see outside of it. And so when you are able to bounce ideas off of other people, then the solutions often to our problems are a lot simpler than we want to admit to ourselves. We try and overcomplicate the solutions. I don't know why that happens, but it does. And so I think that that's a major factor here, is separating that time. I work from home. And so on the other side of this wall is my family. And it was interesting. The first year and a half, 2 years, it was really hard for us to manage giving each other their own space. Like my wife is 100% the full-time mom. And then when I come home from work, walk out of the door, am I being everything she needs and giving her the space to calm down and do her own thing and have her own life, because she's from morning to night. That's what it is. And vice versa, like, even though I'm working all day, there's this expectation. Well, now that there's no 30-minute commute, then I finish an appointment. Hey, are you done? Are you ready to engage? And I'm like, what? No, I need some time, like some time to listen to a podcast, to get my mind straight, read my business, like do things for me. And that's goes both ways. It's not a one-sided thing, or one person gets it, the other person doesn't. Both people need that space. And I see it happen a lot in family businesses, where the lack of desire to stress the other partner out means a lack of communication inside of that. So how did you guys clearly communicate what did need to be communicated without griping or complaining to each other?
Boundaries. It's super important. We created these boundaries within the business walls and our home walls. So when we crossed the threshold of our home, we did our best not to talk about business. It was, what are we doing? What are we having for dinner? We need to clean the house. Did Gus get to where he needs to go? It was super important to separate the two. When we were home, we were home. Now, being the type of business we were, our phones were always ringing, for whatever disaster we were having, a truck breaking down the side of the road, whatever. But for the most part, we tried not to talk about business and bring that home. In the walls, we understood what roles we played. So defining your roles is super important. And knowing, like, when my doors are shut, and I had 2 doors that went, one to the kitchen, one to the sales team, don't come in. Like, don't disturb me unless the building is literally burning down. And just learning how to manage those roles, knowing when to approach me about situations. And the same thing for him. If 90% of the time people just went to Frank, if it got to me, it was literally because the building that happened. The building was burning down and we needed to put out a fire. It's also creating boundaries within your extended family. I had siblings that worked for us, and mainly on the weekends. And then we had Sunday dinners together. And I had to tell him, I do not want to talk about business on Sundays. And he wanted to talk about the wedding the night before. And I put it in an email. Mm-hmm. And put it in an email. He would get so upset with me because I didn't want to have that conversation at Sunday dinner. But it was how I created my own boundaries and kept myself sane at the end of the day.
Sure. Well, and I think that's a part of this podcast is to help people understand what questions should they be asking themselves to create things that work inside of their life. Because nobody's going to sit here and say, oh, well, you should do exactly like Kathryn. No, Kathryn has a dynamic family that has different backgrounds, different people in it. And so what works for her and her family. But there's certain elements that need to work for everybody. And I think that's where the question is, well, what questions can we ask ourselves that will guide us to our solution to that common challenge, rather than saying, hey, this is the prescription drug, right? This is everybody's going to take this one drug for the same thing. Well, what if that person's different? How do we ask the right questions so we're being guided down the right pathway to find an answer that works with us and our family? So what questions were you asking yourself to determine which boundaries to actually set?
I asked the question I asked was, what is important to me? At the end of the day, what is important to me? And it's funny enough, it came from a Facebook, question somebody put out there. It's like, how would you best describe me? Those funny things. And everybody said, she's a good businesswoman. She does this. I admire it. It had everything to do with business. And it made me, I cried about it. I was like, they don't think I'm a good mom. They don't think I'm a good sister. They don't think I'm a good friend. All they see is the business part of me, because that's what I was projecting to the world. And so for me, it was recreating who am I, what I want the world to see, and what is my purpose for what I do. Owning a business is not who we are. It is what we do. In family businesses, though, you start to develop that identity of the business. You are your business. Oh, that's Kathryn, that's Albert, that's Frank. They own that particular business. That's not who we are.
Right.
And so once I started redefining that and saying, okay, what's important to me? It's important that I'm not at the business till 8:00 every night. Okay, so I'm only meeting late on Wednesdays. I created one day where I met with clients late. Okay, what else is I stopped taking my computer home. I turned it off. When I left Daggers, I turned it off and I came home. I took my emails off my phone. So I wasn't distracted when I was home. And I just put a message, hey, I'm spending time with my family. If it's an emergency, call this number. And we had an emergency number that we can call. So I created my own purpose. I created my own boundaries. It's going to be different because what do you want? How do you want the world to see me? Because at the end of the day, I decided I don't want somebody at my funeral to say Kathryn was a good business owner. I want them to say Kathryn did it right. She was a good mom. She was a good aunt. She was a fantastic entrepreneur, but that doesn't define who I was. That was just a part of who I am.
Yeah, no, I think that's huge. And that's one of the reasons when I heard your story, I connected with it so well. One of the taglines, if you will, there's two taglines of Fuel Your Legacy, like the show. And one is identify your identity. Like we have to identify who we are inside. Who are we? The second is I believe you're worth being remembered, but how do you want to be remembered? In 6 generations from now, how are they going to be talking about your dad? Are they going to say, man, he worked his butt off to the bones. He sacrificed everything in the business. And that's like, it's not a terrible thing, right? He created something, but is that how you want to remember your dad? Or do you want to remember him reading books to you when you were 3 years old and going fishing or spending quality time, or maybe he taught you? Anyways, I'll let you answer that. But I think that that's an important aspect is how do you want to be remembered? And too many people get to their deathbed and then say, oh, I hope you remember XYZ about me. That's not how it works. They will remember who you were and are, not who you wish them to remember you as. So how you live matters.
How you live definitely matters. Just recently, a friend of ours that goes to our church posted on Facebook about this little lion. And this little lion was a gift that my dad gave this young kid who's now a freshman at UT Dallas when he was 4. This little treasured gift, and it's a long story, but this little treasured gift meant so much to this 4-year-old that he's taken it to college. And he asks about my dad all the time. My dad passed away in 2012. So for a better part of his life, he didn't know my dad. But for that one moment, he touched him by giving him this little lion and interacting with him. At the end of the day, you want to be remembered for the little things, for those moments, taking your shoes off. My dad used to went to a wedding and the groom forgot his shoes. My dad literally took his shoes off his feet and gave them to the groom so he had shoes to get married in. Being a good person's how he was remembered. Even though people talk about his business, they still talk about what a good man he was. And for me, that is the most important thing. I want people to remember that I did the right thing by them. I always took care of them when they needed to be taken care of. That I showed up. At the end of the day, I showed up. And I didn't want the worry my dad had when he passed. Because literally his last words to my mom were, I hope I prepared Kathryn enough to run the business. That was the burden he was taking with him in his next life, is did I prepare my daughter enough? That's a sad statement. And I refuse to say that, did I prepare my son enough to take over the business?
Right. Rather than just to live life, take on challenges. And so that's actually where we're going to go next with this. So we're going to sign off on Facebook, but some of the next questions we're going to ask about is because you have 4 brothers, correct?
I have 3 brothers.
Three brothers. There's 4 kids. 3 brothers. How did that conversation go when it became clear that you were the younger baby sister going to be getting the family business? And what did that look like as far as how did that negotiation go? So that's what we're going to talk about here moving forward in the podcast. So if you're on Facebook, we'll see you in about 24 minutes with the next show. But if you also want to hear the answers to these questions, you're going to have to go to the Fuel Your Legacy show on Apple or any other podcasting app so you can hear the rest of the show. Have a wonderful day. Okay, so let's dig into this because that's your dad's worry, is stressing about, did I prepare my daughter enough for this? But how did because you went to college, seems like your brothers went to college. How did they escape the emotional feeling of feeling like they had to take on the business? Because it's not that they couldn't have, maybe they could have, but I think everybody's capable. So how did they escape the feeling like they had to?
I don't think they ever did until a certain point. So I gave them the ability to do that. My oldest brother has his degree in education. He's actually a high school football coach now. And that was his passion. That's what he wanted to do. He played ball in college. That was his passion. He came into the business and he was not happy. And it caused a lot of strife between the two of us, right? And I finally went to my dad and I said, look, he doesn't want to be here. I want to be here. You need to give him the ability to go do what he wants to do and give him the okay, that it's okay to go chase his dreams.
So did he come back because your dad expected him to come back? So he came back, but he didn't want to?
Absolutely.
So the bitterness wasn't towards you that you were getting the business. It was just towards the entire thing that he even had to be there for the business.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And so once I did that, Dad understood that, because my dad actually was a pharmacist by trade. My dad got accepted to medical school. He didn't go to medical school because the family needed him in the business at that point, and he needed to take care of his parents at the end of the day. And that's what he did. That was the path that he chose. And which is funny because he put those expectations on his children, and that's not what he did, but it's just that cycle that's there. But once I explained to him, hey, I also said it's either him or me, like make a decision, because I'm not happy because he's making my life crazy. He's not happy because he doesn't want to be here. So once they had a conversation, and Fred went on and he did his thing, and he's been very successful at his thing. It opened the door for the two younger brothers to do whatever. Because once they saw Freddie not being able to do it, they're like, oh, I don't have to do this. I mean, there was obligations through college. If Dad told you to show up, you showed up because he's paying for your college education. But beyond that, there was an obligation to come into the business. My younger brother, John, only worked on the weekends. And because he's a teacher and he's like, I need a little bit extra income. So he worked on the weekends, and that's what he did, mainly on Saturdays. And he ran certain events, and he was very good at that. The baby of the family, he's the baby. He always gets what he wants. He went off to Texas Tech, received his degree in marketing, never looked back, never even tried to enter the family business, had no desire to. And because there's about 10 years between us, there's that age gap. He didn't have to. He didn't have to feel that obligation, because at that point, honestly, I was pretty much running the show prior to Dad's death.
Right. So then Dad dies, and you're dealing with, before Dad dies, some of this stuff came out, but how do you deal with the transition, like the transitional documents that are important to have in place when an heir passes away and leaves something of value to the next heir? How did that conversation happen? And what was the what's the right word? Like, what was the catalyst that said, hey, we got to go find these documents because I don't think we're prepared? Because a lot of people don't even think about it until it's too late. So
we were in that category of not thinking about it till it's too late. So Dad went into a coma in 2012. And on New Year's Eve, 2011, 2012, they said he wasn't going to make it through the week. And I was like, oh, crap. So I went into my whole mode. Okay, solve the problem. Where are these documents at? Let's go to the funeral home, doing everything, just taking care of business, basically, and not leaving my dad's side at the same time. In that moment, I realized he hadn't updated his will since I was a teenager, and that there wasn't a succession plan, and that if something did happen, we're up a creek. I mean, a big financial creek if something happens to him. Thank God he came out of that coma, because it would have been a mess. As soon as he was coherent enough, I said, okay, Dad, I'm bringing the lawyers in. We're going to create a plan of action. You're not leaving until this is in play. You're not being discharged from the hospital until this is done. And so the lawyers came in and a plan was hatched. And I mean, it's a hatched plan at that point. And then after everything was drawn up, the lawyers came together and they created a memo for the family, for each sibling to write. So Dad explained his wishes, and his wishes went like this. And this is because I suggested it. I give up everything personal. And I take on all the family, the business assets and the business. The boys can have everything personal.
And at this point, your mom is still alive?
My mom's still alive.
Okay.
And so what would my mom owned 51% of the business. My dad owned 49 for, reasons. Yep. And so I received my dad's shares upon his death. And then I would receive my mom's shares upon her death. So then I became 100% owner at that point. My brothers were like, well, our name's on the side of the building, even though they hadn't worked the business for the last decade. In their minds, it was their business because a conversation never took place. Nothing was in writing. So that had to be explained. Once it was explained and they understood it, they probably still weren't happy with it. But once they understood it, they signed the piece of paper, the memo, stating they understood Mom and Dad's last wishes. So everybody was on the same page. Dad passed away just like 4 or 5 months after this incident. And then that was a big mess because there are things that my dad just wouldn't let go of. Even though we had a plan of action, there was just certain things I didn't know, like liquor licensing and how to get that and how to put it into my name. And thank God we had a great relationship, so that wasn't terrible, but it could have been. And there, where is this account? Why is this money over here and not over here? So trying to figure out everything while grieving through that process, while trying to run the business, be everything to everybody, and mourn the loss of my dad. Right? Mom passed away 5 years later, and then I acquired the rest of the business. So, but it was always my business. Mom was more of a back end partner, and like my husband was. She supported my dad 100-fold. Right. And my dad couldn't have done what he did without my mom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's important that's the recognition. It's not that she was never involved. Even if she was never involved in the active day-to-day parts of the business, her involvement came with raising 4 great children who are happy, positive, able to go and do what they want to do, achieve their greatness in each of their own rights. There's something you said earlier, or I don't know if you said it or if I just wrote it down, but it was about the idea of like, sometimes we try to fill somebody else's shoes. So after his death, you're like, oh my gosh, everybody has these opinions about what I should do. And we focus on trying to fill somebody else's shoes rather than getting new shoes, getting our own shoes. Or like stepping into these old, worn out, already formed, fitted for the person who was running them before. And we're trying to fill those shoes when in reality, it's a loser's game. They're never going to be comfortable. It's never going to feel right. And in a lot of cases, it's not going to be effective, And so when we choose to switch into getting our own shoes, everything gets better. And that's hard from an emotional perspective. I'm curious again, I'm going back to the kind of the catalysts here. What was the catalyst that triggered okay, I actually need to get my own shoes rather than listen to everybody else? Like what pushed you over the edge? Because I'm sure you knew it before you finally made the decision to disregard other people's opinions and run your own show.
So funny enough, I was at church. So I was just appointed to parish council. We're Eastern Orthodox. I was just appointed to parish council because that was the role my dad had, right? Kathryn was parish council. I won against a cousin who, anyway, it's a political thing, but that's another story. But the cousin came up to me, the father of the cousin came up to me and goes, you better do what your dad expects you to do. And I was like, whoa. And I was like, first of all, I've always done what my dad expects me to do. I don't know why you're coming at me this way. It's a parish council position. I understand the politics of it now. So, but back then I didn't. I was like, I wasn't even wanting to do this. I was asked to do it and I did it out of obligation. Right. So I remember sitting back and waiting for the priest, and the priest comes back and I tell him everything that happens. And I go, I can't do this anymore. I can't be what they expect me to be. And he looks at me and goes, I am only expecting you to be you. You do not have to live up to who your dad is. Because my dad had big shoes. I'm 5'3", my dad's 6'2". You know what I mean? Like they're right. Big. And I have to be okay with being me. I can still be his daughter. I can still be Albert Dagger's daughter without losing who I am. But at that point, I didn't know who I was because my identity was based around him. So that catalyst of trying to find who I was actually that moment of saying, I'm not him. I'm not going to be him. Who am I? And how am I going to get there? So I just started reading all these books, of how to, good to great, all these different books to figure out who I was and finding the brutal truths out about me from my employees, trying to figure out who I was, not as a business owner, but as a human being. And it took 10 years, right? It's still an ongoing thing because you're continuously changing. And I think that's what people need to be. Who you were when you're 20 is not who you are when you're 30. Who you are when you're 30 is not who you are when you're 40. And if you're not growing, you're not learning. And you have to know my dad used to say, don't be complacent. Don't get complacent. Mm-hmm. Don't treat your business with complacency. Don't treat your life with complacency. And that's my big thing is saying, hey, I'm not going to be complacent about my life.
Yeah. And I think that along with the constant growth and change, that was a conversation I had with my wife on our third date. Like, I will not be the same person that you married in 5 years from now. I don't expect you to be the same person. In fact, if you're the same person in 5 years from now, we probably shouldn't get married because I'm going to be different. I expect you to be different. I don't know what that looks like. I have no expectations of what different looks like, but I like change and I plan on changing. But I think also, I just want to maybe put a different perspective on this because there are often opinions of, okay, you better do what this other person would have done. At that point, there's no way to verify what the other person would have or would not have done, which means people will try to, and this is not an accusation towards this person, but it's just a reality of psychology. So I want to separate this and respect whoever this individual is, but also help the individual receiving it. And this is not for you, it's for everybody, the listeners. But emotional manipulation is a factor, emotional manipulation and gaslighting. And so when people start using emotional manipulation to say, hey, you better do what they would have done. Well, then the natural question is, well, I don't know what they would have done. Oh, well, I'll tell you what they would have done. And now they're telling you what they think you should do in the name of your loved one.
Yes.
That is not healthy, right? You should say, look, you should do what you feel. They trusted you to take on a position because you are who you are. The things that they dealt with in the 70s and 80s and 90s from a business perspective are not the same issues at hand. They wouldn't know what to do in this scenario any more than I would. Maybe I know more because I'm more current with the happenings, right? 2020, I mean, imagine for yourself, even imagine your dad going through 2020 and like, well, what does that mean? Different culture, different relationship with authority from political perspective, potentially. I mean, all these different things. And now you have to just like adjust quickly. These things happen every day. And I just wish that, or hope for the people listening, that they're able to recognize in their life when other people are trying to speak in the name of other authority because they feel like their own weight doesn't have enough influence, then they adopt somebody else's weight. And that I think is a cowardly move rather than a, hey, this is what I feel like you should do. Could I have an audience with you and share my perspective on things? That would be a sign of trust and respect. When they try and overhandedly say, well, this is what this person would have done, that's essentially saying, I don't trust you. And so I'm going to tell you what to do through the means of saying that somebody else that you do trust would have told you to do this. That's emotional manipulation. It's gaslighting. Now, is it always negative? No, I do it with my kids sometimes. I say, hey, mom wouldn't like that, but sometimes it's really because I know mom wouldn't like it. I don't really care, but I know that mom wouldn't like it, and I care about mom liking stuff. So now I care, but only because I know mom wouldn't like it. So I don't think that in practice it's always bad. The same thing with like influence and emotion. Influence and manipulation are the same practice with different intent behind it. And so I think it is important to recognize the contrast there, but also call it out so you can recognize those patterns if they're being used against you, and just take a minute and say, okay, well, what do I want to do?
Trust your gut. At the end of the day, I believe that you get that little butterfly in your stomach to tell you left from right. And if you trust your gut, you're going to make the right decision. And there's always going to be naysayers, in a business, especially from a woman's perspective. I didn't just fight the battle of taking over the position, but I fought the battle of being a woman in that position. Mm-hmm. And people who work for us for, decades on end, not wanting to listen to the girl that they saw grow up. I fought that, but go with your gut and believe in yourself when nobody else believes in you, because you'll prove them wrong. Mm-hmm. 9 times out of 10, you're prove them wrong. And my joke during COVID, was, when Dad said, I hope I prepared Kathryn enough, on his deathbed. I look at his picture on my desk every day and say, no, Dad, you did not prepare me for a pandemic. What were you thinking? Why did you not prepare me for
exactly.
that? But he did. He taught me how to think on my feet, plan out, make decisions. We were not in trouble yes, we lost a lot of money during pandemic revenue, but we were not in a bad place. Just in that first 2 months, 6 caterers went out of business in Austin, Texas. We were in a place that we could still sustain even if income wasn't coming in. Mm-hmm. And that's being prepared. That's with the lessons that he taught me. That was you better do what your dad expects you, and me proving people wrong. Yeah.
That's beautiful. So now let's talk about you transitioned out of that, took a 2-week retirement, and then decided that wasn't for you. And now you're going in to help other business owners. What does that look like? And if somebody is listening to this and thinking, hey, I've got a family business, how can I better prepare? How would they get in touch with you to actually receive some of that counsel?
So I have many options for people to get help through me. I have 3 packages that they can choose from. One's, half a year package. So it really dives into them learning to meet their goals. The other is just like a jumpstart package, and it's just 9 weeks. Let's meet a certain goal and move on. I have what I have called FML calls. So for those people who just need a gripe for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and not listen to their spouse doesn't have to hear it again, and they just need a sounding board. So I have that. I just started a group session on Meetup, which is fantastic. So if you go, it's a Ready, Set, Reimagine meeting, and you meet with other entrepreneurs who have like-minded, and have businesses like you or struggling. And it's just a safe place to speak. And I do that every other week, twice a month. And the first couple meetings have been fantastic. But you can always look up me on my website at KathrynAlbarado.com. And that's a great place to get started. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Insta, I'm on LinkedIn. Every social media outlet you can find, I will be there.
Yeah, that's awesome. And just take advantage of every free resource on the pathway to getting the things. People often overlook the resources of just even this podcast, and they say, oh, well, I don't know, I want to just go pay her and have her tell it all to my face. And she's happy to, probably, and most of us are. But at the end of the day, the reason we do educate is because we actually want to help people, and we're not going to tell you anything different to your face than we're telling you right now. Right. Absolutely. We'll have more understanding. So we're going to be able to tailor the advice more to in a language that you're going to hear it and receive it. But the end goal is going to be the same, right? The end goal of succession planning, the end goal of communicating better in work, the end goal of having boundaries, all of those things, they're all going to be the same. It's just how do we communicate them to you in a way that you receive it? And I understand that, but I think taking advantage of all the free resources you can really shows a lot of respect and earnesty in going into a coaching relationship or a relationship where you're going to be mentored on how to become better. Like, take advantage of it, eat it all up, do everything. Don't cherry pick what you want from Kathryn and then go do it to another person and do it to another person. Like, once you commit to something, do it, go all the way through it, do all of it, and be consistent with it. Because in my experience, there's no right way. There's just a lot of ways to do it. And the right way is the one that you make right. And you gotta put in the work to make your decisions right at some point in your life. Stop bouncing around, just commit, do it. It's 20 years, whatever it is. Put yourself in a position so that if there's a pandemic again, you can just take a beat, keep your business going, and rebuild so you can sell it at the right moment. So the timing's right and you're not selling at a loss. So all super important things. Any final words for the Fuel Your Legacy audience?
The choice is yours to move forward. It's up to you to say, hey, I got this. Failure is not an option. It doesn't mean you're not going to fail. It just means you keep on moving forward.
Yep. I love that. And thank you guys so much for joining. If you can, go and leave a comment and a like on the Fuel Your Legacy show on Apple Podcasts or on any other podcasting app that you choose to listen to this on. We'll catch you guys next time on the Fuel Your Legacy show.
Thanks for joining us. If what you heard today resonates with you, please like, comment, and share on social media. Tag me. And if you do give me a shout out, I'll give you a shout out on the next episode. Thanks to all of those who've left a review. It helps spread the message of what it takes to build a legacy that lasts. And we'll catch you next time on Fuel Your Legacy.